Well. Jared, James Nichols. How the hell did we convince you to come here?
I fell asleep last night. Someone came in my room, put something over my face. Next thing I know, I'm at the music zoo.
That's the way we do it in
I don't know what happened, but here I am.
Yeah, well, welcome.
Thanks for having me, brother.
So I have a lot of questions for you.
Yeah.
And so if you go on the Google and you look up you,
yeah,
first thing that came up for me is American blues guitarist, right?
Okay.
And I went, all right. And then I proceeded to take a real deep dive into all of your records and everything that you do.
Yeah.
And I immediately went, well, there's a lot more than just blues going on here.
For sure, man. As you know, I feel like with all this stuff that we love with music, it's like, okay, you know, what does that person do? It's like, oh, rock guitarist. And it's like, yeah, but like, they're probably into a little bit more than that. So I feel like that's kind of the label for me.
And my takeaway was like, you could take Jared and you could drop him in any decade from the 60s to now, and you do just fine. In fact, beyond fine. And I played this game like going like, what would it be like if Jared was in Thin Lizzy?
Yep.
What would it be like if he was in Humble Pie?
For sure.
This could be amazing. And what about Mountain? Obviously, like, and we're Leslie fans, so we'll talk about Leslie in a little bit.
Yeah.
And then you could jump from the 70s and ZZ Top and Billy Gibbons and Johnny Winter. Like, one of my favorite records is Still Alive and Well from Johnny Winter, and I listen to your playing and I'm like, there's some of that in there too.
Oh yeah.
And then let's skip to the 80s, and then I'd go, well, I could absolutely hear Jared in Ozzy's band if, like, totally. You know, like if that opportunity came up, this would work just great. And I played that game in the 80s too with several bands, and then I just skipped to the 90s and go, there's a track on one of your records called Down the Drain.
Oh yeah.
And I was listening to that going, man, you could be in Soundgarden.
Yeah, I love all that.
I mean, and nothing to take away from any of the guitar players that that are in these bands and stuff, but easily kind of place you in all these different genres. So my takeaway was, well, you're way more than a blues guitar player. You have a bluesy style.
Yes.
If you want to.
Totally.
But there's way more to that, and I want to spend some time talking about different tunes, your writing, your playing, some of your influences, where this all came from. You're a young guy, so to have, I feel like, and I don't know you very well, but I feel like you're an old soul.
For sure.
And my takeaway is to have these influences and be able to express yourself the way you do with guitar, and your singing and your songwriting is beyond your years.
Well, thank you, man.
That's
the first thing I would say is, like, everyone who's watching this, you and I, we love music so much that I guess it's like you're a sponge. It's what you hear, right, when you're young. I remember, like, it started with, like, old country. And I was like, oh, that's cool because I like the sound of the pedal steel. I was like, that's kind of cool. I thought it was a guitar.
Right.
And then it's like, I had an older brother and sister, and they were listening to, like, grunge. So I heard, like, Nirvana, Alice in Chains and stuff. I was like, oh, that's cool. That's, like, really heavy. And then my dad was like, you ever heard of Mountain? You know, when I was in, at Vietnam, we listened to Mountain. And I was like, what's that? So you start to incorporate all these things and fill in the cracks. So yeah, to go along with what you said, that bluesy influence, like that's, I feel like, that's the sauce over everything. But it's like there's so many ingredients and so much music that, I love that. Most people are probably like, you really like that? And it's like, yeah, I just love all types.
Yeah, and you could hear it. And so I'm going to jump around with you.
Yeah, totally, man.
So one of the takeaways I had as a person who loves guitar music and guitar players and bands and stuff is, and I'm going to try to explain it to you, and hopefully I get this right, is the compression in your playing. And I don't mean compression like a pedal, but the way you twist notes in and out, and that's a combination of vibrato and just like every note and pull and bend has a thing, and they flow into each other like not many people I've heard.
Thank you, man.
Play.
Thank you.
And I think in the now the age that we're in, where like just faster is always better. Like we see it in the music zoo. People come in here and they just play as fast as possible, and you have all that. but it's the in betweens that is something that struck me that was like real mature, and I guess my long-winded question is how. Where did that come from? Did you spend time thinking about it? Did you, like, in your bends and in vibrato, were you pulling from certain places that, like...
Yeah, well, like, so going back to that blues thing, I remember when I first picked up a guitar, it was like my Mount Rushmore was like Tony Iommi, Jimmy Page, Hendrix, Clapton, right? Like, because I was like, oh, Cream, and, you know, I was hearing Black Sabbath on the radio. And what I noticed about all of those players was when they'd play a lead, I could almost sing it. There was like melody to it, but also like, I'd hear like Hendrix. I remember the first time I heard House Burning Down, which is like off of Electric Ladyland, and he hits like 3 notes in the beginning, and I was like, I don't know why, but I feel a certain way. Like, it made me like emotional.
Right.
So I started trying to figure out, how does that work? And then I got hip to like blues stuff, and I heard like B.B. King, Albert King, Freddie King, Otis Rush, Buddy Guy, Hubert, all the classic blues guitar players. And then I realized, I was like, wow, those guys, just like we all do, you realize they're taking it from this well, and they're kind of, you know, it's coming out, they're filtering it a certain way. But the thing that I noticed is, no matter what generation or era that I was like really into at the time or listening to, you can't beat an incredible feel. And when someone has an incredible feel as a vocalist or a guitar player, I feel like a guitar is just literally an extension of a voice. So I would hear guys like Leslie West on these bootlegs, and he'd play one riff, and he would milk that riff for like 2 minutes. And he'd play it all different types of ways with different slides and vibrato, and he'd turn the tone knob, and then he would, you know, hit it harder or back it off or do a hammer-on pull-off thing. And I'm like, this is like, to me, that was like the gold. It's like you're digging a hole, and it's like, yeah, most people go, oh, well, there's the hole. It's like, no, it's deeper. Go deeper, go deeper. So I really, really got into that aspect of guitar playing. That turned into like, where everyone was trying to go faster down the road, I was more like, you know, like a Billy Gibbons, where it's like, no, man, I want to drive in style. It's like, I want to hit one thing and make that person stop and be like, what was that? Because that, to me, had so much more power, and there's a conviction, and there's just like an overall getting out of being a guitar player. It's like a musical thing where someone hears you and they go, I don't play guitar, but that I like that, you know?
And the musical part of it, I think, is the takeaway I'm getting from it. And not only the playing, but the songwriting.
Yeah.
So you could hear it from your tunes that like there's a lot of thought that goes into it, and a lot of patience, and again, like a lot of maturity. I had several takeaways. I took notes. I'm probably going to skip around my notes. There's a song called "I Like You Better."
Oh yeah.
Okay. So now I'm listening to this tune, and your playing is great on it, but some of my takeaways was the whole band is kind of behind the beat, very Zeppelin-esque. It's very hard to do now, especially American musicians are always, and especially with like a grid and Pro Tools and, you know, like click tracks and stuff like that. But I felt like everything being pulled, and it was
so glad you said that.
So cool to listen to, and I listened to it over and over and over again to see like is it gonna go off the rail or anything? It doesn't. It just stays right behind the beat the whole time, and there's such depth to that, and it sounds so big because of that. And then, you know, like the first couple of times that was my takeaway, and then I started listening to the lyrics, and I was just like, oh man, I can totally relate to all of this stuff that he's talking about. And wonderful tune.
Thank you.
Wonderful tune, and you're playing on it is great and everything. And I'm sure what I tried to not do is watch other interviews with you, because I didn't want to ask you the same questions as somebody else.
This is so awesome. No, this is great.
Because I didn't want to go like, oh, that's the typical thing. And I knew like at some point, like we're doing a clinic tonight here, and I'm sure that somebody's going to be like, hey man, why do you not use a pick?
Oh, God,
You get that, right?
Yeah, every day.
And the compression thing that I'm talking about, I don't think, even though I'm sure it changes the tone of what you're doing, the voicings and everything, it's not what I'm talking about, like with the bends and the twists between the notes and the vibrato and everything. It's two different things.
Yeah, and I think going along with what you said, like digging deeper, there's like a language that whatever genre or whatever you're into as a player, I felt like I tapped into this language where like it's how you speak. You talk about playing behind the beat, right? I would listen to these bands like Free, like Mountain, a lot of English bands, right? The Humble Pie and they're like, a lot of that like early 70s rock stuff. And I would go, man, it feels like the drummer and the bass player are just right behind, and Paul Kossoff is hitting it. Like listen to a classic like All Right Now. It's like he's hitting it, but it's like it's just a little behind. What's up with that? It makes me feel a certain way.
Right.
And I feel like as a player, there was something that I would hear where, take for instance like some classic blues where, if a band was doing a shuffle and the guitar player was so behind the beat, it almost made you uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And you're like, what?
Yeah.
Ugh, but I love it.
No, which is great.
Yes.
And in maybe the fourth or fifth listen to the song, what came up for me, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there's a BBC recording of Led Zeppelin, and the whole thing is great. But the track that always resonates with me is "Since I've Been Loving You," and it's like the best version of "Since I've Been Loving You" I've ever heard. And that's again, it's like all pulled back, and they're doing this live, like where the tendency would be to like I'm gonna rush or I'm nervous or whatever, and it's just so pulled back and so just laid back in the track, and everything just gets bigger.
It's funny, so like when I'm not on the road and I'm not doing my thing, a lot of times living in Nashville, I'll get called to do like a session, I'll be like, hey, we need some rock guitar, we need you to play a solo on this. And there'll be these producers or people that I work with, like you said, it's so on the grid, right? And I'll play something, like I'll play a rhythm part, and the guy will just kind of be like, okay. And then you'll see him move.
Adjusted.
And I go, okay. And then you listen back, you're like, it's not right. And then they put it back and they're like, nope, that's perfect. And it's like, yeah, that's where, when you hear it, like as a human, there's a pulse.
Yeah.
And I think that it's so important to retain that, especially moving into the future of what music is. I'm not saying be lazy or be, not do what you need to do, but there's something about having that human element when you're playing and when you're playing a lead or a rhythm that just makes it feel really, really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
It sits right.
And I think even Jordan and I were talking about this before you got here, and we were talking about vocal tracks. And most producers will tell you less is more. And as you sing less, the vocal just gets bigger in the track somehow. And the more like craziness, the smaller it gets and stuff. And it's almost the same way, like just maturity and pulling back just makes everything grow. And that was one of the takeaways. First of all, it's a great song.
Oh, cheers, man.
And then just the way the whole band played, wonderful. Your guitar playing on it, awesome. So
Thanks,
that was one of my first takeaways. Then, Honey, Forgive Me?
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
So the groove on that, like, after I listened to it, I felt like I could have been listening to like Sly and the Family Stone, or maybe a Stevie Wonder record somewhere in the mid-'70s, and I was just like, wow.
You'll laugh at this. I originally wanted to be a drummer because of like just rhythm. Like listening to, like my dad's huge Sly Stone fan, so I'd hear like "Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself" and all that stuff, and I was like, this is like the coolest music ever. Never played drums, but I fell in love with bass. So like when you listen to that track, and no disrespect to any of my friends that I've jammed with or anything, but I remember my friend that was playing bass on the track, I was kind of like, oh, like it's good, but it's like, it's not like Larry Grant. It didn't lean in. And I went, give me that bass, man. And that's me on bass. Because I feel like there's something, especially when you play a guitar part and a bass part together, especially if the same person's playing it, it gives it a certain feel.
Sure.
And there's a lock. And I'm so lazy that it works.
Which goes back to Mountain again and Leslie West, because Felix Pappalardi and Leslie West had this synergy where the bass and the guitar were playing a lot of times the same thing, and it made the riffs that much bigger. And I guess Cream did that to a certain degree too, right? But for some reason the Mountain song sounded larger.
Huge.
And I felt that from some of the songs that you're doing in the way that they were produced, and just made everything just sound so good. And we talked about it. You said that you got a chance to play with Leslie, right?
Yeah, man. Yeah.
So like, I'd be curious to see like,
you're gonna love
hey
this
kid,
story.
you're like,
so I got the call. This was in 2019, the end of 2019. And I'm in Los Angeles, and I get a call from the dude who's booking me. He goes, hey, Leslie's playing at BB King's next week. Do you want to open? We don't have any money to pay you. And I was just like, yes. And I'm thinking, how am I going to fly my band there? And they're like, no, they only want you to play. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm going to do it solo. So I fly in on a red eye. I show up it was November. I show up to New York City and it's freezing. I came from LA and I'm like, oh, I go to a store and buy gloves. I'm waiting for them to open the doors at BB King's. I'm waiting till like 4 in the afternoon. I'm like, where the hell is everybody? So I get there, and his friend who was teching for him at the time is like, oh yeah, you're that guy. Because at this point, they already know I'm like a Leslie freak. And I was going to do anything to play the show. And he's like, well, Leslie's in a bad mood today. He probably won't be here till the show. And I'm like, okay, great. So all good. I get up there. I start to sound check. They're like, pull up your amp and sound check. And I had this little 112 or whatever Fender, like almost like a Blues Junior. So I start playing, and all of a sudden I hear, who the hell is that? And all of a sudden I see him come over in his wheelchair, and I'm like, whoa. And I stop and I look at him. He goes, keep playing. So I keep like playing, sound checking. He's like, whoa. He's like, and he asked me, he's like, that lick you just played. He's like, and I was like, I got it from you, like, and he goes, oh. And then after I was done, I walked back there to say hey, and he's like, show me that lick you just did. And I like have my guitar in his ear, like, and I was like, this is crazy. So then I get called back up to jam with him, and it was just incredible, man. It was like a dream come true. It was like one of those moments where it was like a pinch me moment, right? And I'm playing all his licks back to him.
Right.
And I feel like it was probably so long ago.
That he doesn't even remember.
Yeah, he doesn't remember. And I was like, dude, Fillmore, 1970, New Year's Eve show. But just me being a nut. And then, of course, after that, we hit it off talking on the phone and stuff. And he gave me so much cool advice. And just like, I don't even think he thought he was giving me advice. It was just him talking.
Yeah.
And I got big ears, man. So I'm
You're sucking it all in.
Oh yeah, and asking him stories and all this stuff.
You came in from LaGuardia, and I was like, well, you flew into Queens,
Yeah, man.
from Leslie's in Forest Hills, and because like we're New Yorkers here, like Leslie made the rounds of guitar stores and
Right.
things like that, and I would see him every so often, and it was like always he was a little cranky at some point. Hey kid, rah, 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 like just kind of bark shit at me. But I would, certainly back in the 80s, I would chase him around wherever he was playing. And he played all of the venues at some point. He played, there's clubs in New York called Lemoore in Brooklyn. There was Lemoore in Queens as well. And he played several, he would play BB King's a lot and stuff. So it always seemed went through the stage where he was playing a Steinberger.
Oh,
with doing all the vibrato with the bar as opposed to like his amazing vibrato.
Yeah.
And I'd always chase him down. I was that kid, like, hey Leslie, hey Leslie, hey Leslie. And the big takeaway that I got from him, and I asked him the same question several different gigs, and I know that he didn't remember who I was like at these gigs, but his influences were Jeff Beck and Pete Townsend. And he said that he took the most from Pete, actually, like in the rhythm playing and just their approach and everything like that. And it was something that I always remembered. I was always a big Who fan, so it kind of made sense to me at the time.
Did you ever listen to him on Who's Next? So there's the original Who's Next for the Who. Pete brought him in to play guitar.
I don't know if I knew that.
Yes. Jack Douglas, this record producer, Aerosmith, Cheap Trick. He told me, he goes, oh, you like Leslie West, He's a New York record plant guy,
right.
Chewing on a cigar. He goes, you ever listen to him when he played on Who's Next? And I'm like, what? It's out. You got to check it out. Anyone that's watching.
I haven't heard that. Okay.
Well, listen to it.
Okay.
He's playing all the lead and most of the rhythm. And Pete Townsend's like on acoustic guitar, and it's Leslie doing all like the Won't Get Fooled Again hits.
Oh my God.
It's insane. So it's funny you bring that up about Pete Townsend because, you can, when you start to hear that, you go, oh, wow, that's true. And even Townsend, when it was like really fuzzed out and heavy, like live at Leeds, it's like you can hear like Leslie, he was listening to that.
They were chasing that.
Oh, for
and
sure.
I think, it's funny, as time goes on, and dare I say this, like as time goes on, like certainly Clapton just kept elevating and Leslie West's fame diminished. Mm-hmm. And then there's the people, I guess like you and I, that just go like, I totally got everything that Leslie was laying down. and I don't want to pick sides, Clapton or Leslie, but there's a group of people that just like were disciples of Leslie and just got it and got Mountain. They were very heavy at the time. It was bigger. It was bigger than Cream. Can I say that?
It was, yeah. And also like Zach Wilde, I remember I was at his house, he showed me his guitars and he goes, Ozzy bought me that 56 Junior, and I was like, oh, that's amazing. And he goes, yeah, he told me that, Sabbath supported Mountain on their first tour to America.
Yeah.
And there's a poster of it. It's Mountain, they're standing on a hill, and says support Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
And he goes, Ozzy said the biggest guitar tone he's ever heard in his life was watching Leslie play the first time live, and he looked at Iommi and he goes, you got to figure out what guitar that was, and Iommi with the SG with the P90s. But it's kind of crazy when you think about that. As time went by, clearly we know what Sabbath and Ozzy did.
Yeah.
But you go, that was the moment, man.
That was it.
Yeah.
That was it. Where that was their moment, and I mean, so they were it for a while. And there's other bands that you did like some covered tracks to. It's funny that we're talking about this, that I took away, again, talking about decades and being able to go like, I'm going to drop Jared into the 70s and he's going to play with Humble Pie.
Yeah.
And it works totally fine.
Yeah.
Works fantastic. Don't send me Steve Marriott text messages. Grand Funk. So I guess now from what we were talking about, this is the influence from like your dad.
Totally. And also making music now, there's been such a well of incredible stuff, right? We'll go on a tour, right, in the past, and it would be like, oh, let's make a little EP, or let's just do something cool for the tour. So it's like, let's do a few originals and some covers. So we did like We're an American Band, right? And then we did 30 Days in the Hole or Man in the Box. And it's just like fun stuff. But what I realize with all this music that I love is it's not that far apart in its like structure and its like DNA.
Right.
It all comes from that same source, because getting to jam with all those guys and ask Jerry Cantrell, who were your influences? And then being like, well, wait, it's just like you keep digging and it's like, oh, Jerry listened to, these guys, and it's Eddie Van Halen, and then Eddie was a Leslie disciple. There's all these parallels,
Yeah, where
So it's
everybody's
really
kind
cool.
of pulling from each other.
Yeah.
And I hear that in this, going back to the songwriting thing as well. I was hearing that before you got here. I was talking to Phil, your manager, and I was like, who's the girl singing backup on all these tunes? Because it's incredible.
She's insane.
And it gives those tunes just yet another layer of just like, holy cow.
I love, so like for me, there's a lot of people that are guarded and gated with recording, and it's like, oh, it's only me in a room. I don't want anyone around. I feel like my favorite part is that collaboration, right? So like, I'll be writing a tune and maybe I'm not even writing it for myself, and it's like, and then we get in the studio and I'm like, oh, let me call my friend Jessica to come sing like a top harmony on it. And then it just gives you a totally different vibe.
It did. It did. That was my takeaway from
It's
it.
cool.
Like, this is awesome.
Yeah, you're like, what is that?
And she's intertwined in several of your records, right?
Ton
So
of
it's
them.
not just one, And it's just, it creates yet another dimension of like your tunes and what's going on and everything. Can we talk about Nails in the Coffin?
Let's talk about it.
All right, so I listened to that tune. Again, another one of these songs which I just kept going back to and listening over and over again. And a lot came up for me, but I'd like to get your perspective on where you were coming from a songwriting, just lyrical perspective, and like where that was coming from.
So that song, like that little guitar riff, was written on a dobro, and I never went down. I would always just play the arpeggios and do the whole song with arpeggios, right? It's like 4 chords the whole time. But that whole song, like lyrically, it comes from a place, I think the best part about writing songs, no matter what level you're at, if you've never written a song or you're one of the biggest songwriters in the world, you can express yourself. And if there's something on your mind, I find that if I bring it out and I write it down, or I just like, even if it's horrible, it just releases like a stress on my shoulders. So that song, it was like a hater song. It's like, people keep beating you up, they're beating you up, and it's like, you think you're gonna put me down for the count. It's like, stick the nails in the coffin. I'm gonna kick them straight out and get right back up.
So cool.
So it was almost like, it's like that quote, I had another one, threw me to the wolves. It's like, you throw me to the wolves, it's like, I'm gonna come back, they're gonna be behind me coming for you.
Yeah.
So it's like a redemption song.
Yeah.
And I got together with 2 friends of mine, and they were like, dude, this is a really cool idea. Can we sketch this out? And they've worked with a lot of different people, from like Lana Del Rey and Bishop Briggs, like more current modern people. And we came up with this recorded version, and I was like, you guys, I love it. It's so different. It's like
So different.
nothing I've ever done.
I'm not a big like rap music guy, but there was a moment where I was like, I feel like he could have co-wrote this with Eminem somehow. Am I way off with that?
No,
Or like,
and the thing about it too, like, it's just like sometimes I let it go where it's gonna go, and having that outside influence will take you different places you never even dreamed of. So it's like when they're like, no, dude, put it like this, and then I sit with it and I listen to it and I'm like, yeah, it feels right.
Yeah.
And I try to never like push something into a hole where it's like, nope, it's got to fit in this blues box and this rock thing. It's like, let's just play music and see what it wants to do.
yeah, it was awesome, and it's evident.
Yeah.
It's evident. I took that away from it, and that was the moment where I was just like, I gotta make a phone call because it's like on Wikipedia it says American blues guitar player, and he's just like he's selling himself short. What the hell's going on here? There's just so much more, and I guess what I'd like to do is ask our audience at the Music Zoo just to take a listen to Jared.
I appreciate that, man.
You got your songwriting got to me. Your playing is just completely off the charts. I told you originally, I was just like, we see you on Instagram, and then
Yeah.
it was a point where we'd tag you and be like, Jared, you need this guitar because it's got a P90, dude.
So many cool guitars coming through here.
And it was
So
just
many
always
cool
just like, this is for him, man. He loves
Yeah,
it.
oh yeah.
But there's just so much more, and I'm glad I got the privilege to go down this road because it just opened me up to like this whole new musical thing, and I feel like I found a friend in you.
Thanks, man.
So I
For
appreciate
real.
it. Continued success.
Thank you, brother.
There's a lot of good things to come with Jared.